H1. Alien warrior threatened the human, but the alien princess and queen intervened swiftly. H2. Part 1. First contact at the edge of the veil. P. The stars did not move out here. They just sat in the black like cold fire, still and silent, watching everything and saying nothing. Cole Garrett had spent enough time in deep space to stop finding that unsettling. If anything, he found it calming now. The universe did not care about politics, about borders, or about which species thought it owned which corridor of stars. It just was. And humanity, for better or worse, had decided to show up in it anyway. Cole stood at the wide observation window of the GCS Ironhold and watched the Veilthari station grow larger as the ship moved closer. He had seen photographs of Sovereign Tier 1 before the mission. Photographs had not prepared him for the real thing. The station was enormous, not just large in the way that human space stations were large, but enormous in a way that made the mind slow down and recalculate. It was built like a city turned sideways and pushed into orbit. Its outer rings rotated slowly, catching the light of a distant blue star. Its inner towers stretched upward in sharp, pale columns that reminded Cole of teeth. The whole structure was the color of old bone, and it sat in the dark like something that had always been there and always would be. "Big," said Laura Dunn, stepping up beside him and crossing her arms. "That's your professional assessment?" Cole said. "I'm a communications officer, not a poet," she said. "It's big. That's what I've got." Cole smiled and said nothing more. Laura had a way of cutting through everything with one word, and most of the time she was right. Behind them, Owen Parrish was at his console pulling up atmospheric data on the station and muttering to himself. Owen was the ship's xenobiologist, a lean and soft-spoken man from Oregon, who had grown up reading everything he could find about alien life, and had spent the last 12 years actually studying it up close. He was not the kind of man who got nervous before a mission. He got excited in a way that looked almost exactly like nervousness, which meant most people could not tell the difference until they knew him well. "The atmospheric blend in the common areas is set to a neutral mix," Owen said, not looking up. "Breathable for humans without any supplements. That is a good sign. It means they planned for us. Or they planned for someone else, and we just happen to breathe the same air," said Darius Holt from the corner of the room. Darius was the team's security escort. He was a former Marine, broad-shouldered and quiet, with the kind of stillness that did not come from relaxation, but from long training. He sat with his back against the wall, watching the room, even when there was nothing in it to watch. He did not have Owen's excitement, or Laura's dry humor. He had something more useful out here. Patience and attention. He never missed anything. Cole looked at the four of them and thought, not for the first time, that he had a good team. Not the flashiest crew the diplomatic corps could have sent, but a good one. The Ironhold docked without trouble. The docking arm extended from the station with smooth mechanical precision, and the ship locked into place with a low thud that Cole felt in his boots. A recorded message played through the ship's speakers in the common tongue, a language that most spacefaring species had adopted for cross-species communication over the last 2 centuries. The message welcomed the human delegation to Sovereign Tier 1 and reminded them that the station operated under Veilthari law, and that all disputes on station grounds were subject to Veilthari authority. Cole straightened his jacket, picked up his briefcase, and led the team out. The first thing he noticed when they stepped into the station's entry corridor was the smell. It was not unpleasant, just strange. Something like cool metal and something else underneath it, faintly sweet, like rain before it falls. The corridor was wide, with high curved walls that glowed a soft white from no visible source of light. Other delegations were moving through the same corridor, and Cole took note of them as they walked. There were Keth, short, gray-skinned, with 4 arms and quick black eyes, moving in a tight group and speaking rapidly among themselves in a clicking language. There were Solon, tall and thin, with pale blue skin and long fingers, drifting slowly like they had all the time in the universe. There were a handful of other species Cole recognized from briefing files, and a few he did not. All of them glanced at the humans as they passed. None of them held the glance for long. Humanity had only been to this station twice before, both times as observers. This was the first time humans had come with a petition, a formal request for access to the Veil route, a trade corridor that passed through contested space, and would cut weeks off the journey between Earth's outer colonies and the deeper sectors. It was a reasonable request. Cole knew it was reasonable. The challenge was getting species who had been navigating this corner of the galaxy for thousands of years to agree that a species who had only arrived recently also had a right to a seat at the table. The reception hall was a large, open room with a domed ceiling and soft lighting that shifted color slowly, cycling through blues and greens. Delegations stood in loose groups, talking and observing each other in the careful way that diplomats always did, friendly on the surface, studying underneath. A long table ran along one wall, with drinks and food items that Cole did not recognize, but Owen was already cataloging quietly with his scanner, murmuring notes to himself, with barely contained joy. Cole moved through the room slowly, stopping to exchange brief greetings with a Keth diplomat he had met at a previous summit, and a Solon official who spoke excellent common tongue, and asked polite questions about human travel times. He was careful and steady. He did not push. He let people come to him when they were ready. It was during one of these quiet moments, standing near the edge of the room with a drink he had not tasted yet, that Cole noticed her. She stood at the far end of the hall, near a tall arched window that looked out over the rotating outer ring of the station. She was Veilthari, tall, silver-eyed, with the pale, almost luminous skin that the Veilthari were known for. She wore long silver robes and was surrounded by 4 members of an honor guard who stood so still they could have been statues. She was not speaking to anyone. She was watching the room. And for just a moment, her eyes moved to Cole. He held the look for exactly 1 second, then glanced away calmly. He did not know who she was yet. But something in the way she stood, not with the casual ease of an observer, but with the quiet attention of someone who had been given a specific task, told him she was more than a guest at this reception. Laura appeared at his shoulder. "That is Princess Sail Vorath," she said quietly, reading from her small display device. "Second heir to the Veilthari throne. She is listed as the summit's official royal observer. Mostly a ceremonial role, apparently." "Mostly," Cole said. Laura looked at him sideways. "You think?" He did not answer, because at that moment a low vibration moved through the floor, subtle but unmistakable to anyone trained to notice it. Darius was beside Cole in 3 seconds, not running, just appearing, the way he always did. "Docking sensors," Darius said quietly. "Something big just came in, not scheduled." The murmur in the reception hall shifted. Cole watched the Keth delegates stop talking. He watched the Solon officials exchange a long glance. He watched a Veilthari station officer step away from the room and speak quickly into a comm device, pressed to his jaw. Word moved through the hall the way bad news always moved, fast and with weight behind it. The Krath war fleet had arrived, 3 days ahead of schedule, and their commander, High Blade Dorek Val, was already on the station. Cole took one slow breath, set his untouched drink down on a nearby ledge, and said to his team, "Stay close, stay calm, and let me do the talking." He just moved 2 steps to the left, giving himself a clear line of sight to the hall's main entrance. Alien warrior threatened the human, but the alien princess and queen intervened swiftly. Part 2. The Warrior's Challenge. The Krath did not enter a room. They occupied it. That was the only way Cole could think to describe it, when the main doors of the corridor opened, and Dorek Val walked through them. It was not just the size, though the size was real enough. Dorek stood 7 feet tall, covered head to foot in layered scales the color of dark iron, with a ridge of thick bone crests running from the top of his skull all the way down to the base of his neck. His hands were wide, and his fingers ended in short curved claws. He wore no formal robes, No diplomatic colors, no ceremonial markings of peace. He wore battle armor, scratched and dented in the places that told you the scratches and dents were earned, not decorative. Behind him walked 8 members of his war guard, in a tight formation, each one carrying a long-handled weapon across their back. The corridor outside the reception hall had been busy minutes before. Now it was nearly empty. The other delegations had found reasons to step away, to drift back into side rooms, to suddenly need something in the opposite direction. The Solon moved quietly. The Keth moved quickly. Nobody made it obvious, but everybody moved. Cole did not move. He stood in the corridor with Laura on his left, Owen a step behind him, and Darius slightly to his right. They had stepped out of the reception hall 2 minutes earlier, when Darius had picked up on the change in station security movement. Guards repositioning, senior officers being summoned. Cole had made the call to step into the corridor rather than be cornered in the hall. Open ground was always better, or at least less bad. Doric Val moved through the corridor at an unhurried pace, his war guard matching him step for step. He looked at each delegation he passed the way a man looks at furniture. Present, noted, irrelevant. A pair of Keth delegates pressed themselves against the wall as he went by. He did not even glance at them. He slowed when he reached the humans. Cole watched him slow and felt the change in attention. The way Doric's yellow eyes moved over the 4 of them, with the particular interest of someone who has heard something about a new thing and is now deciding what he thinks of it. The war guard stopped behind Doric, spreading slightly in the way trained fighters spread when their commander pauses. Not a threat display, just readiness. Doric looked at Cole for a long moment. Then he said in the common tongue, in a voice like gravel being dragged across stone, "You are the human envoy." It was not a question. "Cole Garrett," Cole said, "United Earth Diplomatic Corps. It is good to meet you, High Blade." Doric did not respond to the greeting. He looked Cole over slowly, the way a builder looks at a wall he is considering knocking down. Not with anger, just with assessment. Then he took 1 step forward, closing the distance between them by half, and looked down. "I have heard about humans," Doric said. "Short lives, soft bodies. You have been in space for what? 200 years? 3? "About that," Cole said. "My people have been traveling between stars for 11,000 years, Doric said. "We were building war fleets before your species learned to write its name in the dirt." Cole said nothing. He had nothing to prove by arguing that point, and he knew it. Doric continued, "I have also heard that your kind has submitted a petition to access the Veil route." He let the words sit in the air for a moment. "That corridor passes through space the Krath have held for 600 years. We have not given access to any species that has not proven its worth to us. You have proven nothing. That is why we are here," Cole said, "to make the case." Doric made a low sound that might have been a laugh in another context. "Let me make something clear to you, little envoy." He was now close enough that Cole had to tilt his head up to meet his eyes. "If humanity does not withdraw this petition before the summit closes, I will make sure that your ship does not leave this sector, not in one piece." The corridor was very quiet. Cole heard Owen take a slow breath behind him. He did not hear Laura make any sound at all, which meant she was doing what she always did when something went sideways, going completely still and processing. Darius, to his right, did not move. But Cole was aware of him the way you are aware of a door that is closed but not locked. Doric reached out and placed 1 scaled hand on Cole's shoulder. The weight of it was immediate and significant. Krath grip strength was documented in every xenobiology report Cole had ever read, as being roughly 12 times that of an average human. The pressure was not painful yet, but it was there to be noticed. It was there to say, "I could make this painful." Cole looked down at the hand on his shoulder for exactly 1 second. Then he looked back up at Doric's face, and he did not move. "I hear you," Cole said. His voice was level, not aggressive, not afraid, just steady. but I want to say something back, if that's all right. Dorek's crest rose slightly, a crass expression that the briefing files described as surprise mixed with something close to curiosity. Humans did not come from an easy world, Cole said. Our planet tried to kill us in more ways than most species ever had to face. Ice ages, famines, diseases, storms that could flatten a city in a night. We spent most of our history with nothing but our own hands and heads to get through it, and we got through it, every time. He paused, not for effect, but because he wanted to make sure he said the next part right. So pressure, real pressure, is something my species understands well. We have been living under it since before we had words for it. And it has never yet been enough to stop us. The corridor stayed quiet. Dorek's yellow eyes did not move from Cole's face. The hand on Cole's shoulder did not lift. But something shifted in Dorek's expression. Something small, like a stone moving underground, before anything on the surface changes. Cole had seen that kind of shift before. It meant the person across from him was recalculating. Then Dorek's grip tightened. Not a lot, but enough. Behind Cole, Darius moved. Not fast, not dramatically, just one calm step forward, and his right hand came to rest on the grip of his sidearm, without drawing it. He said nothing. He did not need to. Every trained fighter in that corridor, and there were 8 of them in Dorek's War Guard alone, registered the movement and what it meant. The War Guard shifted. Weapons that had been resting across backs were no longer resting quite so loosely. Cole did not look away from Dorek. Dorek did not look away from Cole. It was, Cole thought, the kind of moment that could go in any direction, and most directions were bad. Then a voice came from behind Dorek's shoulder, clear, cold, and carrying the particular authority of someone who had never once in their life needed to raise their voice to be listened to. High Blade Dorek Val. The name landed in the corridor like something dropped from a great height. Every member of Dorek's War Guard went still, not the stillness of surprise, the stillness of trained soldiers who have just heard a voice they recognize and know they have to respond to. Dorek turned his head, just slightly, and Princess Sail Vorath walked forward, through the space the War Guard had opened for her, without being asked. Her silver robes moving quietly against the floor, her silver eyes fixed on Dorek, with an expression that was not angry or afraid, but was completely, absolutely certain. Cole kept his feet where they were. He waited to see what came next. Alien warrior threatened the human, but the alien princess and queen intervened swiftly. Part 3. The princess and the queen intervene. Princess Sail walked forward at an even pace, and everyone in that corridor watched her. She was not the tallest person in the room. She was not armed. She had no war guard flanking her. Just 2 quiet attendants who stopped at the edge of the space and did not follow her further in. And yet every single member of Dorek's War Guard had gone completely still the moment she said his name. Not because of fear exactly, because of recognition. The Valothari royal line was not a ceremonial institution. It was the backbone of the Dominion's authority, and every species with any knowledge of this region of space knew that the Valothari did not intervene lightly in anything. When they did intervene, it was because something had been decided. Dorek still had his hand on Cole's shoulder. He had turned his head to look at Sail, but he had not lifted his hand. It was a deliberate choice, Cole understood, a show for his own war guard. He was not going to be seen yielding to a young princess in a corridor in front of 8 of his soldiers. His pride was as much a piece of his armor as the battle-worn plates across his chest. Sail stopped 3 steps away from Dorek. She looked at his hand on Cole's shoulder first, then she looked at Dorek's face. She did not look at Cole at all, not out of dismissal, Cole felt, but because she understood instinctively that making eye contact with him in this moment would shift the dynamic in the wrong direction. She was not here to rescue him, She was here to enforce something. "You are standing on Valothari sovereign ground," she said. Her voice was not raised. It did not need to be. "This station operates under Tier 1 accords, to which the Craft Dominion is assigned party. Under those accords, threatening a registered diplomatic envoy on station grounds is a recordable violation. That means I hold a witness seal." She paused for exactly one breath. "I am informing you that I am preparing to use it." A witness seal, Cole knew from his briefing files, was a formal Valothari legal instrument. It meant that whatever the princess recorded in an official capacity could be entered directly into the summit record, and beyond that, into the Dominion's permanent diplomatic archive. It could affect trade agreements. It could affect fleet access permissions. For the Krath, who relied heavily on Valothari-controlled space lanes for parts of their supply chain, a formal violation on record was not a small thing. Doric knew all of this too. His crest flattened slightly. Not much, but enough for Cole to notice, and Cole suspected Sale noticed it too. Doric's jaw shifted. He was calculating. He was not afraid of Sale personally. Cole was fairly sure of that. But he was a commander, and commanders think about consequences. "The humans stood in my path," Doric said. His tone was slower now, but still heavy with authority. "I was making a point." "You were making a threat," Sale said, with the precise calmness of someone correcting a factual error in a report. "Those are different things. One is conversation, the other is a violation." Doric looked at her for a long moment. The corridor was so quiet that Cole could hear the low hum of the station's ventilation system moving air through the walls. Then, from above them, came a sound. It was not a loud sound. It was the sound of doors opening, specifically the tall double doors that led to the upper observation level overlooking the corridor. Those doors, Cole had been told in his briefing, were only opened for one reason when the station was hosting a summit. Every head in the corridor tilted up. The Valothari Royal Guard came first, a double column of them moving in perfect silence down the wide staircase that connected the upper level to the main corridor floor. Their armor was ceremonial but real, pale metal with the Dominion's crest pressed into the chestplate. They moved with the kind of coordination that came not from drills, but from years of genuine service. They reached the bottom of the staircase and split into two lines, forming a path. And then, Queen Viera Sorath descended the stairs. She was not a large woman by any physical measure. She was of average Valothari height, dressed in deep gray robes, with a single thin circlet resting against her forehead. No grand crown, no sweeping ceremonial display. She did not need any of it. She carried herself with the weight of someone who had been making decisions that affected billions of lives for 2 decades, and that weight was visible in a way that had nothing to do with clothing or crowns. She moved the way people move when they are entirely sure of where they are going, and entirely unbothered by who might be watching. She came down the stairs, passed through the line of her guard, and stopped at the base of the staircase. She looked at Doric Val. She looked at his hand, which was still on Cole's shoulder. She looked at Doric's face. "High Blade," she said, and then in the common tongue she said 4 words. "Remove your claw, now." That was all. No speech, no argument, no explanation, just 4 words, spoken in a tone that was not shouting and was not threatening, and was somehow, because of those very things, more final than either. Doric's hand came off Cole's shoulder. It was not fast, it was not eager, but it came off. He lowered his arm to his side and held the Queen's gaze with the expression of a man who was reminding himself that he was choosing this, not being forced into it, which was, Cole thought, exactly the kind of face-saving calculation that made things like this survivable for everyone. The war guard relaxed. Darius, to Cole's right, let his hand fall away from his sidearm without drawing attention to it. Cole turned his shoulders slightly, rolled it once, and said nothing. Queen Vera held Doric's gaze for another few seconds, long enough to make it clear the moment was hers, and she was ending it on her own timeline, not his. Then she looked away from him, and she looked at Cole. Cole met her eyes. He did not look away, and he did not look down. He waited. The Queen looked at him with an expression that was careful and measuring, the way a person looks at something they have just received new information about, and are revising their understanding of. It was not a warm expression exactly, but it was not cold either. It was attentive. Cole gave a small, slow nod. Respectful, not subservient. The Queen returned it. It was a small gesture. 1 nod, 2 seconds at most. But every diplomat still standing in that corridor saw it. And Cole knew they saw it, because the quality of the silence in the room changed. Something had been acknowledged. Not friendship, not alliance, not yet. But recognition. The Queen of the Valthari Dominion had looked at a human envoy in a moment of real pressure and nodded to him. And that meant something in a language that had nothing to do with words. Queen Vera turned and walked back toward the staircase. Her guard fell in behind her without being signaled. The double doors at the top of the staircase opened as she reached them, and closed without a sound after she passed through. Doric Val stood in the corridor for a moment more, then turned and moved away, his war guard reforming behind him. He did not speak again. He did not look back. The corridor began to fill with sounds slowly. Movement, voices, the ordinary noise of a busy space station resuming its business. Other delegations who had made themselves scarce drifted back into view, adjusting their robes and composing their expressions with the practiced ease of people who were professionally trained not to look like they had just been watching every second of what happened. Laura appeared at Cole's side and said very quietly, "Well?" "Yeah," Cole said. Owen was already making notes on his small device, murmuring to himself about Krath physiological stress indicators and the biomechanics of Valthari vocal authority, and what the Queen's nod might mean in terms of formal diplomatic signaling. Darius said nothing. He scanned the corridor once in each direction, decided it was clear, and settled back into his ready stillness. And at the far end of the corridor, just before she turned through a side archway and disappeared from view, Princess Sail looked back over her shoulder at Cole. Just for a moment, just long enough to meet his eyes. Then she was gone. Cole stood in the corridor with his team around him and the weight of what had just happened settling into his thinking. Not just the threat and the intervention, but the nod, the Queen's nod, and the princess's glance. He picked up the thread of what it meant and filed it carefully away. There was still a summit to get through, and now he thought it was going to be a very different summit than the one they had walked into. Alien warrior threatened the human, but the alien princess and queen intervened swiftly. Part 4. Aftermath and Undercurrents. Absi. The summit resumed the next morning as if nothing had happened. That was, Cole knew, the professional way of things. Diplomacy was built on the shared agreement to continue talking even when every instinct said to stop. The corridor incident had been witnessed by at least 30 delegates from 9 different species, and every single one of them had spent the rest of the previous evening processing it, discussing it in private rooms, and updating their assessments of everyone involved. But when the main hall filled again the following morning for the first formal session, everyone sat down, opened their notes, and got on with business. Except that things were different. Not loudly different. Not in any way that you could point at and name. Just different in the way a room is different after the weather changes outside. Same furniture, same walls, but a new feeling in the air. Cole noticed it in the way delegations looked at him now. Before the corridor, the glances had been brief and uninterested, the polite minimum that experienced diplomats gave to a minor species they had no particular reason to engage with. Now the glances lingered. He caught the Ket senior delegate watching him during the opening remarks of the first session with the expression of someone solving a puzzle they had not expected to find interesting. He caught two Solon officials leaning toward each other and speaking quietly while their eyes moved to the human section of the room. None of it was unfriendly. It was just attention, and attention, real attention, from species that had been navigating this part of the galaxy for centuries, was exactly what the human delegation needed. The Krath contingent, by contrast, sat in their section of the hall and said very little. Dorek Val was present but quiet, his crest flat, his expression giving away nothing. The Krath diplomats around him were professional and precise in their statements, and they did not look at Cole at all. Which Cole noted privately was its own kind of acknowledgement. Deliberate avoidance was as telling as deliberate attention. Dorek had not forgotten the corridor. He was recalibrating. Between sessions, the interactions began. The first came from a Keth delegate named, in the closest the common tongue could manage, Vel, a small, quick-moving individual with large black eyes, who introduced himself during the midday break with the direct efficiency typical of the Keth. He said that his delegation had been following the human petition with interest and wanted to understand the specific route access points humanity was requesting. Cole sat with him for 20 minutes and walked through the logistics clearly and honestly. Vel listened without interrupting, asked 3 precise questions, and thanked him with a nod before moving on. It was not a commitment, but it was an open door. The second came more unexpectedly. Owen was standing near the edge of the hall, eating something from his personal ration pack, because he was still too cautious about unknown food chemistry to try the station's provided refreshments, when a delegation from a species called the Arath approached him. The Arath were roughly humanoid in shape, but broader, with textured gray skin and large amber eyes that moved independently of each other. Their lead scientist, a broad-shouldered individual who introduced themselves in careful common tongue as Bren, asked Owen if he would be willing to discuss human biology. Owen agreed immediately. He would have agreed to that conversation in his sleep. Bren explained that the Arath had been observing the corridor incident on the station's security feed, as it emerged, had most of the station, and had flagged certain physiological readings from the human delegation that they found anomalous. Specifically, they had been monitoring stress indicators in the bodies of everyone present, using the station's passive atmospheric sensors, which among other things, tracked hormone dispersal in enclosed spaces. The readings from the Krath War Guard had been what the Arath expected: elevated aggression markers, elevated readiness signals. The readings from most other species in the corridor had shown fear or anxiety responses. The readings from Cole and Darius, however, had been unusual. Their stress hormone levels had risen. The Arath were clear about this. They had definitely registered physiological stress, but the levels had plateaued quickly and held steady, rather than continuing to climb. And in Darius specifically, the sensors had picked up a very particular pattern that Bren described as controlled readiness. High alertness with suppressed external expression. The Arath had a term for it that roughly translated as loaded stillness. Owen, who had been listening with growing delight, explained that humans had a long history of functioning under extreme stress. That they had developed, over many thousands of years, a range of biological and behavioral responses to threat that prioritize steady function over immediate reaction. That the kind of discipline Darius showed, the stillness, the hand on the weapon without drawing it, the complete absence of telegraphed movement, was not a personal quirk, but a trained pattern built on top of a biological foundation that had been selected for over many generations. Bren processed this quietly, and then said that the Arath had studied over 200 spacefaring species, and had only documented the loaded stillness pattern in 3 of them. All 3 were species that had originated on high-danger worlds. Owen beamed, he could not help it. We're one of 3, he told Cole later, with the kind of pride in his voice that most people reserved for their children's achievements. Out of 200, that is not nothing. It is definitely not nothing, Cole agreed. Meanwhile, Laura was having her own unexpected afternoon. She had accepted an invitation from a young Velthari communications aide named Teshe, a slim, pale individual with quicksilver eyes and careful movements, who had been studying human linguistic patterns for 2 years and wanted to know if Laura would review the work. Laura had expected to spend an hour going through a basic analysis and offering polite corrections. Instead, she found herself sitting across from the most thorough and genuinely sophisticated piece of xenolinguistic research she had seen outside of an Earth university, produced by someone who had never once spoken directly to a human before that afternoon. Teshe was nervous throughout. Laura was careful to be warm because she understood what it meant to spend years working on something in isolation and then have to show it to someone who actually knows the subject. She told Teshe at the end of their 2 hours that the work was excellent. She meant it. Teshe's expression shifted in a way that was unmistakably relief. They thanked Laura 3 times and asked if they could send questions by comm after the summit ended. Laura said yes. The most significant interaction of the day, however, was the one Cole had in a small meeting room off the main hall at the 3rd hour of the afternoon. He had been formally invited to a private meeting with Princess Sail Vorath. The invitation came through official Vaelthari channels, carried by one of Sail's attendants on a physical card, which, Cole's briefing had told him, was the Vaelthari way of indicating that a meeting was to be taken seriously and was on the record. The meeting room was simple and quiet, with 2 chairs and a low table and no decorations except for a single long window that looked out at the stars. Sail was already there when Cole arrived. She stood at the window, turned when he entered, and gestured to the chairs. They sat across from each other. The conversation began with formal exchange, status of the human petition, the structure of the summit schedule, the logistics of the Veil route request. Cole answered clearly and without exaggeration. He did not oversell humanity's position or undersell the practical difficulties. He was honest, and he had the sense that Sail noticed and valued that. Then, after a pause, she asked him a question that was not on the summit agenda. "Why did you not yield to him?" she asked. "In the corridor, you knew what he was capable of." Cole thought about how to answer that. He wanted to get it right, not for diplomatic reasons, but because she had asked it genuinely, and she deserved a genuine answer. "Because we come from a long line of people who did not yield when they should have, according to every reasonable calculation," he said. "And it worked out often enough that the ones who were left standing passed that quality on." He paused. "I am not saying we are fearless. We are not. I was scared in that corridor, but being scared and holding your ground are not opposites." Sail was quiet for a moment. Then, she said something that stayed with Cole for the rest of the summit, and well beyond it. She said, "We have a phrase in Old Vaelthari. It has no perfect translation, but the closest version in the common tongue is the species that refuses the lesson of the floor." She met his eyes. "It is an old phrase. We say it about very few." Cole held her gaze. And now, she said quietly, "we may need to update the list." She stood, and the meeting was over. But as Cole walked back to rejoin his team, he passed a Vaelthari station officer, who stopped, looked at him for a moment, and said that the human petition had been moved to the top of tomorrow's summit agenda. H1, alien warrior threatened the human, but the alien princess and queen intervened swiftly. H2, Part 5, The Standing and What Comes After. The last day of the summit began early. Cole was already up before the station's lighting shifted to its morning cycle. Sitting at the small desk in his quarters, with a cup of coffee he had brought from the ship, and a set of notes he had been going over since before the first hour. Outside his window, the stars were the same as they always were, still and cold and patient. He had stopped noticing them somewhere around day 2. Now he noticed them again, because on the last day of something important, the small things come back into focus. He was ready. The formal session began at the 2nd morning hour. The main hall was full. Every delegation had turned up, which was not always the case on a final day, when positions had already been set, and the remaining business was mostly procedural. The fact that all of them were present told Cole that news of the human petition being moved to the top of the agenda had traveled quickly, which of course it had. These were diplomats. Information was their environment. The session chair, a senior Valthari official with gray hair and a measured, unhurried manner, called the room to order and opened the first item on the agenda. He stated the nature of the human petition clearly and without editorial comment. The United Earth Diplomatic Corps was requesting formally registered access to the Vale Route Trade Corridor for human commercial and civilian vessels, under standard Valthari-administered transit protocols. Cole stood when it was his turn and made the case. He did not use dramatic language. He did not make any claim about humanity's greatness or potential or destiny. He spoke practically and specifically: the distances involved, the transit times, the economic effect on the outer colonies, the safety protocols humanity was prepared to adopt, the fee structures they were willing to accept. He told the room that humanity was not asking for a gift. It was asking for a fair entry into an established system on the same terms as any other registered species. He spoke for 12 minutes. He answered 4 questions from other delegations, including one from the Keth delegate Vel that was precise and technical, and which Cole answered precisely and technically. He thanked the room and sat down. The vote took 9 minutes. The petition passed. 14 delegations in favor, 2 abstaining, 1, the Krath, formally objecting but not blocking, which under Tier 1 Summit rules was not sufficient to prevent a majority decision from standing. Laura let out a long breath beside him. Owen wrote something in his notes very quickly, and Cole caught the words, "We did it," before Owen turned the device face down on the table, with the careful discipline of someone who did not want to be seen being emotional in a formal diplomatic setting. Darius, on Cole's other side, said nothing, but Cole saw his jaw shift slightly, and from Darius that was practically a standing ovation. Cole kept his expression neutral and professional, because it was not over yet. There were closing statements to sit through, procedural items to complete, and a formal signing of the summit record that would take another hour. Diplomacy did not end at the good moment. It kept going, and you kept going with it. So he kept going. The signing of the record took place in the station's formal chamber, a high-ceilinged room with carved walls and long tables covered in documents in 12 different languages and scripts. Each delegation's lead envoy signed in turn. When Cole's turn came, he picked up the offered stylus, a long, thin Valthari instrument, nothing like a pen, and signed his name in clean, clear letters. His hand was steady. He noticed as he stepped back from the table that the Krath diplomatic officer who had come forward to file the formal objection glanced at his signature, and then at him, and gave a small, reluctant nod. Cole returned it without expression. That was enough. The formal proceedings closed. Delegations began to move. Conversations started up. The particular kind of noise that fills a room when official business is done and people become people again spread through the chamber. Cole was standing near the far wall, talking quietly with Laura about the transit protocols they would need to draft when they got back to the ship, when he heard footsteps approaching, heavier than most, measured in the way of someone who has decided to do something and is doing it deliberately. He turned. Dorek Val stood 3 feet away. He had come without his war guard, just himself, in his battle-worn armor, his crest at a neutral height. He looked at Cole with his yellow eyes and said nothing for a moment. Cole waited. Then Dorek said in the common tongue, but slowly, as if the words were being chosen with some care, "You are not what we were told you were." Cole held his gaze. "What were you told?" Dorek said. "That humans were new, untested, temporary." "We might still be temporary," Cole said. "Most things are, eventually." Something moved in Dorek's expression. Not warmth, not respect exactly, but a kind of recognition. The recognition of one thing that has survived difficult circumstances, looking at another thing that has also survived difficult circumstances, and finding in that a small piece of common ground that neither of them had expected. Dorek said nothing more. He turned and walked away. Cole watched him go. Laura appeared at his shoulder. Was he being nice? I think that was as close as Dorek Val gets, Cole said. Huh, said Laura. Owen joined them from across the room, still holding his notes device. The Arath delegation wants to set up a formal research exchange with the Xenobiology division back home, he said, and there was barely contained excitement in his voice. A real exchange, joint study. They have been asking me about human immune system complexity for the last 2 hours, and I have never been happier in my professional life. File the request when we get back. Already drafted, Owen said. Darius had moved to Cole's side in the quiet way he always moved, appearing without announcement. Departure window is in 3 hours, he said. Ironhold is fueled and ready. Cole nodded. They were in the main docking corridor, moving toward the bay where the Ironhold was berthed, when the sound of footsteps behind them made Darius slow. Cole turned. Princess Sail Voroth was walking toward them with 2 of her attendants at a respectful distance behind her. She stopped when she reached the group, and stood with her hands folded at her waist, very formal, very composed. Cole recognized the posture from his briefing materials. It was the Veilthari posture of official farewell, extended to dignitaries and allies, not to minor new contact species. Envoy Garrett, she said, on behalf of the Veilthari Dominion, I wish you a safe return and a clear route. Thank you, Princess, Cole said. On behalf of humanity, I thank the Dominion for its welcome and for the fairness of this summit. There was a pause. Formal phrases done, official posture held. Then Sail's expression shifted, just slightly. Not dramatically, but enough to be a shift, the way a window looks different when a cloud moves away from the sun. My mother has added a standing invitation to the summit schedule, she said. Permanent observer status for human envoys. It begins next cycle. Cole absorbed this quietly. Permanent observer status meant a seat at every future summit. Not as a petitioner, but as a recognized party. It was not a small thing. I will make sure the Corps is informed, he said. We will not miss a session. See that you do not, Sail said. And there was something in the way she said it, not a command, not exactly, but the voice of someone who actually meant it and had actual reasons for meaning it, that Cole filed away carefully. She gave a formal nod. She turned and walked back toward the station's inner corridors without looking back. Laura watched her go. She likes you, she said. She appreciates what happened in the corridor, Cole said. Cole, Laura said, with the particular patience of someone who has known a man long enough to know when he is being deliberately obtuse. She likes you. Cole chose not to answer that, and started walking toward the docking bay. The Ironhold's engines were already running through their warm-up cycle when the team boarded. The ship smelled like recycled air and old coffee, and 100 small human details that Cole had stopped noticing until they were back inside them again after 3 days on the station. He moved through the familiar corridors to the observation deck and stood at the wide window. The others joined him one by one, without being asked. Owen came first, still typing into his notes device. Laura came next, leaning against the wall with her arms crossed. Darius came last, and stood apart from them slightly, facing the window. The docking arm released. The Ironhold drifted back from Sovereign Tier 1, and the massive station moved slowly in the window until it was smaller, and then smaller still. The blue star beyond it caught the station's pale columns and threw long shadows into the dark. Nobody spoke for a while. Then Laura said quietly, I did not expect to actually like it out here. Cole looked at the station getting smaller in the black. He thought about the Queen's nod, and the Princess's glance at the end of the corridor, and Dorek's 4 words, and Tesh's 2 years of work done in hopeful isolation, and Bren's amber eyes wide with honest curiosity. He thought about the 4 billion years his planet had spent trying and failing to end the line that eventually ended up with him, standing at a window in deep space, watching an alien station drift into the dark, after the most important diplomatic meeting of humanity's short spacefaring life. Darius, who had barely said 10 words in 3 days, looked out at the stars, and said in a voice like something stated simply because it was simply true, We never do. We come anyway. The Ironhold moved deeper into the dark, toward home, carrying its 4 humans and their news and the particular quiet feeling of something that had been difficult being done. And behind them, on Sovereign Tier 1, in a private chamber above the main hall, Queen Viera Sorath sat at her desk and read a freshly filed report on humanity. The report had been written by her daughter. It was detailed, careful, and precise, with an unusual quality of genuine attention in the language. Not the language of a royal observer completing a formal duty, but the language of someone who had seen something that changed the shape of what they expected to find. The Queen read it twice. Then she set it down, looked out at the same stars Cole was looking at from the other side of the dark, and sat quietly for a long time. Then she reached forward, opened her classification system, and marked the file Priority Archive. Humanity had arrived, and the galaxy, for the first time, was beginning to understand what that meant.